Alrighty, Karen, whenever you're ready.
Okey-doke. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the fourth annual Delaware County Sustainability Conference hosted by the Delaware County Office of Sustainability. My name is Karen Wilwall, and I am the director of the Delaware County Conservation District. Today, I will be serving as the host of today's session, providing important information to ensure that your experience, both in today's session and throughout the rest of the week, leaves you feeling informed and inspired. First, a few housekeeping things. This session will take place in a Zoom webinar format, and this means that participants will be off camera throughout the duration of the presentation. Questions are encouraged and will be addressed following the presentation. To ask again, you can either type it into the Q&A box, which is found at the bottom of your screen, or you can click the raise a hand button if you would like to ask your question out loud. Questions will be answered in the order received, or if we're seeing multiple questions of a similar nature, we can pose the front. We will do our best to ensure that all questions have been answered. However, please keep in mind that we will be ending the session promptly at the top of the hour. Now, to kick off our session, we are very excited to welcome Meagan Hopkins Doerr. She is the coordinator of the Penn State Extension Master Watershed Steward Program in Chester and Delaware counties. She will share her presentation titled Become Watershed Friendly from Home. We've worked very closely with Meagan over the last couple of years as she's grown the Master Watershed Steward Program in Delaware County. We've worked with these excellent volunteers on stormwater management projects and education throughout Delaware County to meet the goals of the Conservation District and Penn State Extension. To give you some background on Meagan, she is an ongoing learner with a background in teaching, nonprofit development, and volunteer management. After 15 years working in Philadelphia as a teacher and an educational nonprofit program director, Meagan joined Penn State Extension as a dual coordinator for Master Gardeners in Chester County and Master Watershed Stewards in Chester and Delaware counties. In July 2023, her position was split into two full-time positions, the increased number of active volunteers, community outreach, and local projects. Meagan remains the Master Watershed Stewards of Chester and Delaware County. She has been privileged to collaborate on creating the Watershed-Friendly Certification, its expansions, and related outreach. Meagan is excited to continue growing and learning alongside the volunteers with whom she is honored to work. I will turn it over to Meagan to take it from here.
Thanks, Karen. I will go ahead and share my screen so we can go ahead and get started. Karen, can you confirm that you see that?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. So as Karen mentioned, I work for Penn State Extension. Thank you all so much for joining us today. If there are any questions, feel free to add them to the chat. Add them to the Q&A, and we will try and get to all of these before we end at 1 o'clock. At Penn State Extension, we believe that all people should have access to science-based education, and so put on presentations such as this, create programs such as the Watershed-Friendly Certification, do outreach, and so forth. Extension is in your community. We are all over the place, including here in Delaware County, and there are various team members that are in these different groups. The Master Watershed Steward Program is in the Agronomy and Natural Resources team. Today, we are focused on becoming watershed friendly from home. So they're environmentally friendly decisions and behaviors that you can do. And I'll share a resource through the Watershed Friendly Certification to go back to, because in 1 hour, there's no way that we could cover all the topics and all the ways that you can become watershed friendly. So by having that resource, that certification, it's a great place to go back to, and I will share how to use that as a knowledge base, even if you don't decide to apply for certification. Before that, I want to talk a little bit about the Master Watershed Stewards and who we are essentially. The whole program was developed as a collaborative program with groups like the Conservation District and Office of Sustainability to do boots on the ground work and educate our neighbors in our communities. Our volunteers come from all different backgrounds and go through an introductory basic training to provide a platform of information and understanding to enable them to go out and do that volunteer work. Um, we have a whole bunch of stewards. We have over 100 stewards between Chester and Delaware County, and then I will share numbers statewide in just a second. It's an amazing program. These are some of our stewards with a vernal pool monitoring program that we do in Delaware County. If you're interested at all, please feel free to reach out. We will welcome a new group in probably February. So right now, there are over 1,000 volunteers across the state, and we're in 42 counties. It started in 2013 up in the Lehigh Valley, and since then have contributed over 100,000 hours. It's actually, this slide is very out of date. You will see that in a second, and educated a whole bunch of our neighbors. So this is from our last program year. Just last year, they donated over 44,000 hours across the state. And since its inception, it's almost 200,000 hours since the founding in 2013-14. Trees planted. There were almost 30,000 trees planted last year and a little over 100,000 trees planted since the start of the program. That is trees are such an important impact. Water Research Center jokes that fish grow on trees because of all the great impacts that they do, and we will talk about some of that a little bit later on in this presentation. So for our agenda today, we're going to start with the background. So what are the issues? What is a watershed? Best management practices and things that you can do wherever you live. Watershed-Friendly Certification, because again, that is a great resource to go back to look at how to do some of these things. What's some more information about what you can be doing? One of the quotes we got from a recent certified resident is that she thought she was doing so much, and she really was. But by going through the certification and going through the application, she realized how much more she could do. So that's essentially what this is. Where are you on that line of all the things, positive things that we can be doing? And how can you move a little bit further? We'll have some um, chat about resources, including using the certification and others in Penn State, and then time for questions and answers at the end. So I like to start out presentations with a little bit about myself because why should you listen to me? Um, this is, these are some pictures from my own yard. We moved to Delaware County almost 12 years ago, and I love my property. I love where we live. I love my neighbors. I'm very happy to be here. We moved from Philadelphia. But there were things that I knew that I wanted to do. So if you see on the right-hand side, that's some of the initial drawings I did for landscape choices. Most of our property was mowed, except for the gardens right next to the house, and some unmanaged areas on different sections. It's about an acre and a quarter, so decent sized property, far larger than I had in Philadelphia when I had a rooftop garden. Um, we had a fair amount of issues with stormwater ponding. So there'd be stormwater runoff that comes from most of our neighbors, and because of the elevation before the street, would pond in our yard and be there for days. So I knew that was one of the first things that I wanted to deal with. I also wanted to make landscaping choices with my plant selections and other things to really try and be part of our local ecosystem to enhance and benefit that. And I can't tell you how much things have changed over that 12-year period. Our summers in July light up with fireflies. Um, our stormwater ponding issue, we still have some ponding, but it is resolved in less than 24 hours now because of those choices that I've made. I see all sorts of different wildlife. I do have a milk snake on here. I love seeing snakes. That might not be your thing. If you want to totally ignore them, by all means. But when you make those choices for your own yard, think about what appeals to you, whether it's fireflies, whether it is hummingbirds, whether it's butterflies, whether it's what have you. Um, and then focus on your actions based on that because you're going to provide benefits for all of those things, even if you're primarily focused on one objective. So sadly, this is my own yard. This is just that didn't play. This is just last year. So we do have stormwater. This is probably a pretty typical thing for what many of us see. You have a bunch of rain that comes down, it washes along some kind of impervious surface, such as a driveway, and then just kind of like runs off. So as you can see, it runs to both sides before it hits that street in my own yard. And again, those are things that I wanted to deal with. Sorry, hold on just 1 second. Nope, you don't need to see that again. It's not just stormwater that's an issue. There's study after study about the decline of insect populations, including our pollinators that are vital for our food. So thinking about those things, it is insect population declines in bird populations. And that's not just because of the choices we make with our windows, things like that, but it's habitat loss in insect. Probably many of you are very familiar with Doug Tallamy's work in terms of what he talks about with baby birds needing insects. So if you don't have those caterpillars, if you don't have those native plants that many of our um, butterflies and moths, Lepidoptera, require certain types of plants for their larvae, for their caterpillars to feed on. If you don't have those, then you're not supporting many of our baby birds and thus not having the adult birds. And then our stormwater issues with Pennsylvania. About a third of all the all the waterway miles in Pennsylvania are impaired. And impaired means that it's unable to support healthy aquatic life or maybe unhealthy for use with drinking water, recreation, or fish consumption. So that's a pretty big issue. And if you see where those red streams are, indicating those impaired waterways, you could see that they're consolidated down in the southeast where we are, which makes sense if you think about where our population density is across the state. So this is from a 2022 study. It has actually recently was updated. And many of our streams have not been tested. So we're unsure where they would fall. Now, a watershed is kind of a hard concept because you hear water, you think literally water. But a watershed is all the land and the water on that land. So that's surface water and water we don't see, groundwater that drains to a certain body of water. So again, it's the land, it's the water, it's all of those things are the watershed because everywhere you are is a watershed. So what happens affects far more than just what you locally see in your yard. It affects our streams, it affects downstream, it affects your neighbors. And so we'll look at some maps to talk a bit about that. It is important to know that includes our stormwater drains. many of which go directly to our creeks and bypass any treatment. Again, we all live and impact a watershed. So there are a couple different names. There are basins, watersheds, subwatersheds, etc. These are the major basins or major watersheds in Pennsylvania. We're in the Delaware River Basin. So we're going to pull in a little more and look at Delaware County. So in Delaware County, most people on this call are in one of those sub watersheds. They're also called watersheds. The names are pretty much used interchangeably, so it doesn't matter much which you prefer to call it. I think you would see my cursor. I live up here, um, in the Chester Creek watershed, close to the border with Ridley Creek watershed. That means that what I do in my property all the way up here, I lost my cursor, all the way up there, towards the edge of Delaware County border, affects all those people downstream of me in my Chester Creek watershed. It also affects the Delaware River Basin downstream of me because the water and stormwater that leaves my property flows into the Delaware Creek eventually. First, it will join the Chester Creek through tributaries and then join the Delaware Creek. It's important to know how connected we are to our neighbors because again, what we do affects them. So all of these things combined are why we ended up creating the Watershed-Friendly Certification program. And as I started to mention, I will use this as a framework. If you don't decide to apply for it, no harm, no foul. But please use it as a great resource because there's a lot of links in here that will help you, as well as different best management practices that are all those criteria. So this is a collaboration between Nurture Nature Center, which is up in the Allentown area. If you can go visit them, please do. It is a lovely organization, and the Master Watershed Steward Program. We have had several expansions over the years from the initial um, creation, and it has been supported by DP grants. So, um, why should you become watershed friendly? And again, if you don't, no worries. But if you decide to, it's a way to share your environmental commitment with not just yourself and your friends, but your neighbors. Um, I love having people over for bonfires or just visiting and getting comments on my yard. And I try not to go into too much of a tirade, but I will then talk about like, oh, these were the issues. These are some of the things that we have. Like, this is some of what you can do. Um, it's a way to encourage your neighbors to do the same. I'm very lucky with some of my neighbors that they have a commitment to environmentally friendly landscaping choices. So that absolutely contributes to the fireflies that I mentioned seeing in my own yard and the wildlife. it the more we can have small pockets of things, the better it is. It's protecting your local streams and rivers and creeks and all the living things, including us as humans that depend on clean water. And it promotes habitat for birds, fish, and other wildlife. So an overview of the certification. Again, it has a lot of education and background. It's broken up into four different categories, and then the community actions is a fifth category. If you decide to apply and reach 85% score in your application, then you are certified and you'll have the option to purchase a lawn sign or a window decal claim. Um, We'll go over more of this, so I'm not going to spend much time on this slide. There are three different applications. So whether you live in an apartment or HOA or something where you are under a quarter acre or don't control your property, there's an application for you that involves a lot more actions inside your home as well as community actions. And then what you can do on your property if you if you do control property. There's the mid-size, that's a quarter acre to 15 acres, and then large lot that's over 15 acres. So we try and have something for everyone. We're also currently working on a community application that should be applicable to HOAs and municipalities and neighborhoods that don't necessarily have political boundaries. So I've mentioned stormwater a couple times. Let's start off. This is the first category in the certification. So what is stormwater runoff? Under natural conditions, so when it rains and precipitation falls to earth, it can hit a variety of different surfaces, and the type of surface and some other variables dictate what happens next. So, under natural conditions, most of that water will soak into the ground and called infiltration, and that will help to recharge our groundwater. That will keep most of the water on site, things like that. That's in some of your pristine vegetation. Um, but unfortunately, we live in pretty built environments, and so when it hits those lawns, um, it can it doesn't infiltrate much, and we'll have a couple slides on that. When it hits your impervious surfaces, such as my driveway, that's not providing any infiltration. So when that water and precipitation hits those uninfiltratable areas, it runs across the ground, picking up litter, pollutants, and various other contaminants, and will generally take them directly to a stream, creek, river, either through a storm drain or other methods, because water runs downhill. And so it's going to those large bodies of water. And again, often taking those contaminants with them. So I talked about different landscape conditions and what that can be. In forested infiltration, you have about 18 inches of rain an hour, and only about 10% of that will leave as stormwater runoff, which means about 90% of it infiltrates into that ground. A little bit of stormwater runoff is natural, but you're talking about 10%, that's not very much. Our mowed lawns are generally compacted fields with dense matted roots that allow about 2 inches of water per hour to infiltrate, and up to 97% of that precipitation that hits that mowed lawn will become stormwater runoff. So, again, picking up those pollutants and other things. And then you have impervious surfaces, which block all infiltration. So 100% of the rain and snow and sleet and other types of precipitation that hit those impervious surfaces become stormwater runoff. How quickly, even if they leave that impervious surface and go onto a lawn where there is some infiltration, depending on how fast that sheet flow, that water is going across the surface, will impact how much can infiltrate too. So we want to slow it down, capture things, allow infiltration on site as much as possible. I mentioned you'll see some pictures from my own house. The picture on the right is of my parents' house. They are in New Jersey. They do not qualify for the certification. Um, but through encouragement, they have a mixture of plants, native and ornamental, and are through encouragement, adding more and more native plants to their area and enjoying the birds that have come with that. So, why is stormwater a problem? Stormwater is one of the biggest sources of water pollution and the top pollutant source in Pennsylvania, only followed by acid mine drainage or abandoned mine drainage, depending on which you're using the acronym for. Southeast Pennsylvania has some of the highest percentages of polluted waterways, and nearly all those streams in Delaware County are impaired at 94% impairment. So we really have a lot of work to try and keep those pollutants on our property, as well as help infiltrate that water, since that is the biggest pathway for pollutants getting into our streams. So there are different ways to do that. And we're going to talk about BMPs. BMPs are best management practices, and the criteria in that certification application are various BMPs, whether it's a formal best management practice or it's just the best methods for doing things to help control stuff. And I'll have some examples in a sec. So those BMPs help to minimize flooding and erosion. They help to improve water quality. They're based on research and experience for interventions to help, again, reduce, slow down, prevent stormwater from leaving your property, capturing it, delaying it, all those things, as well as treating the stormwater pollutions and pollutants that it may carry. That can include riparian buffers, which are those vegetated areas next to bodies of water, rain gardens, more engineered structures, etc. And this is a downspout planter. If you if you are enjoying that picture with a little hummingbird visiting the bee balm, that was done by Watershed Stewards. We have several. This one is in Count Township. There's one outside of the Conservation District, as well as one outside of the Environmental Center in Smedley Park. So we have two in Delaware County that were installed by stewards, as well as several organizations that help residents to do that, including several of the Eastern Delaware County Stormwater Collaborative that have done with neighbors. So there are other things to do. And I should mention, plants are a fantastic tool for slowing the flow of water. I'll be mentioning native plants quite a few times. It is interspersed throughout the certification for various reasons because of all the great things they can do. Trees are particularly good. I mentioned how Stroud jokes that fish grow on trees. Um, that's because they have deep roots that help break up that soil, help with infiltration, getting that water into the ground, as well as the water that is taken up and stored in the tree itself for its life processes. You also have those canopies that intercept rainwater, and there'll be a slide that demonstrates that in just a little bit. You have more engineered things such as permeable surfaces instead of solid. So if you have a driveway that is not driven on quite as much, you can look at some of those permeable pavers or a patio or things like that. Just something to help to get that water in. You do want to make sure that it doesn't get filled in and blocked with too much sediment. So keep on top of that. Looking at native plants, mini meadows that you can put in. The picture down below that talks about mini meadows, that is in Philadelphia. So finding places that these things can go, or working with a watershed association, your neighborhood, community groups, things like that, to put them in around you. Um, Volunteering with our parks department, our conservation district. There's lots of opportunity. And of course, become a master watershed steward. So these are just, again, two examples. So you have your rain barrel that can be used to water non-vegetation, so water any ornamental plants, your native gardens, things like that. Used to wash your car, used to wash your gardening tools, things like that. Things that you don't need that water to be drinkable. It's a great use for rain gardens. I'm sorry, for rain barrels. You do want to make sure to empty them in between stormwater events. This is another example of a downspout planter. So if you don't have much gardening space but you do have a downspout that you can modify, you can look at having a planter down below it to give yourself some more area to garden, either with native plants or other things that you would like. Looking at vegetated bump outs, particularly if you're a municipality or something where you can control those streets, they're great for slowing down traffic as well as allowing that stormwater flowing over streets to enter and infiltrate in those bump outs. Or rain gardens. Your rain gardens don't necessarily need to be all flowers. That's generally the picture that we see because they're lovely and often what we want to do in our own yards. But this one is outside of the Mann Center in Philadelphia. There are three rain gardens there that are working fabulously to infiltrate a lot of that water on site. You also want to take advantage of sidewalks, including sidewalk and roof planters. So those planters collectively will add up to a fair amount of water that will go in there and slow it down from leaving that property. Again, looking at where you can add those native trees and perennial plants. This on the right-hand side is another picture from my parents' place. So they live on less than a quarter acre in total. So they looked at different areas that they could add native plants. On the corner on their fence line, you can see our native honeysuckle. So they love it sitting out there on in the yard, watching those hummingbirds flock to those flowers when they're in bloom. There's also, they chose to go with Ohio spiderwort along that fence line instead of something like non-native like liriope. So again, providing some of those benefits just with the simple, small choices that they can make. And I'm going to talk about lawns a couple times. We are not anti-lawn by any stretch of the man, um, by any stretch. But your turf grass. So this is a great picture to look at to see why it's so important to take back some of that mowed lawn area if it's not being used. So because turf grass, if you look both the vegetation above and below the ground, it's a very short, the roots are very short and dense. Um, because of that, when rain hits it, when you have precipitation that hits it, it's not getting into the ground very much. Those dense matting roots prevent a lot of infiltration. Those short leaves on top, because we know it, are providing very little interception for that rain coming down versus all those deep-rooted, tall vegetations that you see on the side. Um, Keep in mind, there is there is depth measurements. Take those with a grain of salt because there's so many things that impact how deep your roots will grow. But by having a variety of root types, you are allowing the water to get in as well as that integration between those different roots, allowing again more water to sink in. That above ground vegetation is intercepting that rainwater, decreasing the likelihood for erosion. Um, as well as if you're choosing to do native plants, you're providing a whole host of other benefits. Because we can't keep all the runoff from leaving our property, we want to look at reducing water pollution. So this is the next step in that certification. There are two types of pollution. You have point source pollution, which is less of an issue now. It really was an issue before some of the like Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, some of those things. And that's where you can point to a pipe discharging pollutants and say that's where this pollution is coming from. That's why the stream is polluted. But that is less the case now, and are dealing with much more of non-point source pollution. And that's where you have little bits of pollution sprinkled all over the place that cumulatively add up to a really big impact. And so a lot of those are coming from urban runoff, agricultural runoff, landscape runoff, which could be incorporated in either of the other two. So we want to help reduce the amount of non-point source pollution that we are contributing. And our lawns, unfortunately, are a big source of non-point source pollution. And that's because they take a lot of input to maintain them. So if you have a monoculture, so you have all the same type of lawn, it's almost always non-native grasses. It takes a lot of input to keep up that aesthetic appearance, even if it is a mixture of different grass types and other plants. That mowing puts out, you're using non-reusable oil-based, gas-based inputs to mow your lawn, potentially irrigation. You're looking at different things, the air pollution, the water pollution, all these things. Again, if you are using your yawn, say you have kids or dogs or things that are frequently using them, absolutely keep them up. You can look at the different strategies such as mowing frequency, mowing deck height, different ways that you can treat your lawn that will be a little more environmentally friendly. Um, we'll deal with a couple of those in a few slides because they are some of those questions in the certification as well as resourced on the side. But the more we can move from traditional mow and blow, which is tidy, manicured lawns, to watershed friendly, ecologically, but diverse, at least areas of our properties and landscape, community landscapes, the better it is because there are all sorts of values that they will provide. Unfortunately, our mowed lawns provide very little diversity. They're mostly, again, non-native plants. There's little habitat value to them. You may have seen that image passed around on social media where it shows a lawn with like grubs and maybe like one or two other things that are supported versus a diverse plant diverse um, garden that provides habitat, that provides food sources, shelter, all those other things. Um, and we don't often talk about soil, but the soil impact really is important. So we'll look at that in a little bit as well. Again, preventing pollutants from entering waterways is important. So part of the application, part of the things that you can do are keeping storm drains clean because for most of us, that that goes down a storm drain is going directly to our creeks. So we want to keep out the litter, keep them from being blocked. Even with vegetated debris, you want to prevent the blockage and definitely prevent the litter from going to those streams. You want to keep your fats out of your drains in your homes, in your storm drains, etc. So, not to be gross, but in our house, that's a jar from our house, that's my hand. For my cooking oils, we put them into different containers and send them to the landfill when they're full. That helps to protect your own pipes, as well as prevent some of those fatbergs and things that you might have heard about. They were pretty, there was a lot of news about them during the pandemic during 2020, as most people, many more people were staying at home. There's lots of other things that you can do to help prevent runoff pollution. So picking up after your dog, and other animal waste, not using, reducing, or at least being very conservative with the amount of salt that you put on, and definitely never use fertilizer as a salt mill. Um, that causes all sorts of problems with excess nutrients running to our waterways. Composting your clippings. If you're gonna wash your car, washing it on going to a commercial um, car wash that reuses its water is actually the best. If you're not doing that, if you're washing on site, wash it on a lawn, on some kind of vegetated area where that water can go into the ground using environmentally safe soaps, things like that. Um, Small things that we can do that really just help keeping your property tidy, not having different things that can leak and so that leachate, things like that, that can happen to, again, join that stormwater runoff, leaving your property and entering our waterways. Because we want to keep things clean, as well as talking to your community members about how to reduce some of those pollutant behaviors and just being conscious of things. So you see somebody here putting one of the storm drain markers next to a storm drain because many people don't realize that goes directly to our creeks. And so it's not going, for most of them, it is not going to a water treatment center. It's going to our creeks, which is where a lot of our drinking water comes from, is our surface water. So even if you want to just think selfishly about it. The third part of the certification is conserving water. We live in a water-rich area. However, it's kind of astounding how much water is actually available for our use. So if you see, there's a model of the globe. If you see those blue dots, the largest one is liquid fresh water. I'm sorry, the largest one is all the water on Earth. So that includes our salt water, our fresh water, things that are trapped in glaciers, etc. So that seems relatively small compared to the Earth. That second smallest one is liquid freshwater. So that's getting pretty small there. And then if you can see that tiny little pinprick, that would be about like South Carolina area probably. That's the fresh water that's in lakes and rivers. So that's the water that's accessible to us from surface water that we can use for our drinking water. And that's in the entire world. Not just that, not just the amount of water, but to make our water potable or drinkable, that water is withdrawn. It goes to a drinking water treatment center and goes through a large process, a whole bunch of inputs versus chemical treatments, illumination, various things to make it safe for us to drink. So there's a lot of things that have to happen. It's resource intense relatively. So if you're not using that water for drinking, think about other ways, such as using um, a rain barrel, things like that. Get collecting that rainwater to lessen your need on potable drinking water. Because we have beautiful areas like Ridley Creek State Park. So that is actually my husband and our dogs in Ridley Creek State Park. We greatly enjoy going there. There are so many wonderful areas to enjoy nature and enjoy our waterways. But again, in Delaware County, 94% of our waterways are impaired, which means that they would be considered unsafe for fish consumption, drinking water use, recreation, or for the organisms that live in there. And part of that, and most of that, is from the different impairments that are coming and pollutants that are coming with stormwater. So there are ways to save water during routine activities. There's so much that we can do. So please don't ever let any of the negative things like the impaired waterways, things like that get you down because more and more of what we do, there's very few large scale issues that can be solved by one person. But collective action can make a huge impact. And so that's why we're here. That's why we're talking about this. Because it's all that collective action that we can do that can really make a positive impact. So some things are using water from your rain barrel for various needs, watering your gardens, cleaning your tools, watering your car, things like that. Watering wisely. So using soaker hoses or timers when you are growing food or establishing your plants. Or if you're using hose, making sure to water when the sun's not out. So early morning or early evening, because when the sun midday, much of that water is going to evaporate. And again, like I said, mentioning native plants a whole bunch, planting native plants. Because once they're established, they generally don't need watering. Um, And again, there's a multitude of other benefits that those native plants provide. Doing other things. If you're like me, you heard all those lessons when you were a kid about turning off the faucet when you're brushing your teeth. So turn it on to wet your toothbrush, turn it off after you're done. Fixing those leaks when you spot them. So not letting those leaks continue to occur. Um, Using reusable water bottles. Well, that's not really decreasing the amount of water necessarily. It is at least decreasing the amount of plastics that we are using. The fourth section of that certification is supporting wildlife because the actions that support wildlife also support the watershed. So looking at landscaping choices, turning off your outdoor lights. If you're not able to, at least looking at having covers or different colors of light that affect those migrating birds and insects less, as well as again, native plants, because again, we're going to mention them a whole bunch. Providing shelter, habitat, or nesting for a variety of wildlife. So if you can have a brush pile that's away from your house, absolutely provide it. If you can have some exposed soil for your ground nesting bees and wasps, provide some of those. And they are your ground nesting bees and wasps, yellow jackets aside, um, are generally pretty docile and not the ones, not yellow jackets that are much more aggressive. Looking at ways that you can reduce that mowed lawn area to as particularly going with native plants or growing your own food, as well as allowing natural composting, whether that's grass clippings that will help to aerate your lawn, leaf litter that will help with those overwintering bugs and other wildlife. If fireflies are your thing, they take at least 2 years in that duff, in that leaf litter, and their larva state before they can emerge as adults. So that is important. Without those things, you're not enabling those fireflies in to thrive. These are pictures from my own yard. So when you're digging in yard, your healthy soils are going to have different types of bugs, different types of roots, decomposing matter. And the one on the left-hand side, pictures on the left-hand side, are from many years of not mowing as well as leaf litter allowing to decompose there. Whereas the ones on the right-hand side were years of mowing and short roots because that mowing. We do allow our lawn clippings to stay on site, but the bugs I found were grubs. Sometimes a worm, but primarily grubs. That degraded soil area can become more like that healthier soil, depending on the choices that I make, since these are pictures from my own yard. Including grasses. They provide multi-seasonal interest as well as habitat throughout different seasons. So overwintering bugs will use them, shelter for during storm events, things like that, soil protection, and just general aesthetics. Some of our grasses are just simply gorgeous. If you think about your blue stems and other things with those beautiful fall colors, just a nice things. And then controlling invasives. So I hate to say, I mean, I showed you some bigger pictures from my own yard. The one on the left-hand side is from my own yard. Those are some of the invasives that we deal with, that I deal with here. On the right-hand side is in the community. So those are some of our stewards cutting back multi-flora rows near a vernal pool in Delaware County. Community action, if you're looking at that urban small lot application, is a prime part of that. So working with community members for watershed health with invasive removal, plantings, litter cleanups, etc. There are three different types of applications, and I'm going to speed up a little bit since this is all the resource and things that you can go to find out information. On the main page if you scroll down, look at that application, all those criteria are different positive things that you can do from home. But if you don't want to go to the application, that's totally fine. This is simple. I'm pretty much going to skip by. Other than pointing out on the right-hand side are a whole bunch of links to different resources that relate to those different criteria. If you don't want to even go that way, on the main page, scroll down to the bottom, click on that more, and then you can choose things like rain gardens, all those things that you see on the side. There's also inspiration. So looking at rain barrels, rain gardens, different things like that, see what some of the other applicants have on their own property to find out what you might want to do. And there are beautiful pictures in there. So this is the rain garden section from that inspiration. You can see those resources on the side. And then these are some of the submitted pictures that applicants provided. So maybe there's something that inspires you and you think, oh, I could do that, whether in my own property or neighbors or in my community. Um, Again, this is the certification for urban or small lots. It is under a quarter acre. For looking at those different pictures, because you can look at lots of different pictures, not just those categorized ones. If you go down on whatever application you're interested in, scroll down, and if you see where it says see a photo gallery of certified properties, those will be applications that pictures that were submitted for the application that you're interested in. These are just some of the ones that were submitted for the small lot. So you can see community action. You can see some of those sidewalk planters, backyard planters, etc. I do want to say, if you're interested in native plants, we currently have our watershed-friendly native plant kit sale that is available. They are themes. This year we are doing dry sunny, dry shady, deer resistant, um, ground cover, and some single species kits. And there's a whole bunch of things. This is an annual thing. So even if you don't see something this year, keep it in mind for next year. And we have our native tree and shrub sale that is opening up soon. Penn State Extension has a whole bunch of resources. So this is the Watershed Basics that has lots of information about stormwater, about what you can do. A lot of resources. And then this is the QR code to go to that watershed-friendly certification. It's just available at watershed-friendlypa.org. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope you'll certify your property or at least go to the certification and use many of those resources.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Megan.
Absolutely. I'm going to not close this for a second in case there's any slide specific questions.
Sounds good. Well, thank you again. For anyone who tuned into a previous session about watershed planning and stormwater impacts, Megan's presentation and this watershed-friendly certification program really drives home the effectiveness and importance little projects do make a big impact. So with that, we will now open the floor for questions. I do see one in the Q&A that I will read aloud. Sorry, Stuber asked, is there a potential problem with collecting rainwater, such as in rain barrels, that could deplete the groundwater?
No. So the stormwater that would be collected in rain barrels is coming off of your roofs. Um, I am floored every time by the amount of stormwater that comes off our roofs. It comes off so fast from our roofs, downspout, moving very quickly. So it can, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry if you hear that. I just got a phone call. Sorry about that. If it goes to vegetated areas, that's fine. For collecting it in a rain barrel, the point is that you're going to use that water later on. So it's not becoming part of that initial flush of stormwater that's coming down. So that's why it's not a concern about not getting into that groundwater and recharging it because it wouldn't anyway.
Great, thank you. And then I actually have a question for you. Do you think that these watershed-friendly projects have a bigger impact if they're located towards the top of a watershed at the headwaters or towards the bottom of a watershed?
Ah, that is an ongoing conversation about where the biggest impact for your projects are. Um, you have different ways of thinking about it. Yes, the more you can infiltrate up above, because if your headwaters are impaired, it's tough to really have clean waters as you go downstream. Um, eh, they are all important. It is important everywhere. We are all neighbors, and so the more I can do up, I'll be honest, I'm right near a headwater. The more I can do to protect my headwater helps my downstream neighbors. But I have friends downstream, and the more they can do helps their downstream neighbors as well as their local community. So it's important everywhere.
Great answer, thank you. And then we do have a couple questions from Josh Minster, or I'm sorry, Josh Mintzer. He's asking, when collecting rainwater for plants, what are their limitations? And he's referring to pollution potentially coming from roof tiles or impervious.
Sure. So because our roofs can have different pollutants of not things that would be unsafe for us to drink. We don't recommend using collected rainwater in rain barrels, things like that, for watering the plants you will eat. However, there's not an issue. There haven't been any studies that have shown a real negative impact on our native plants. If you're concerned at all, use it for washing your tools. So garden and then wash your garden tools with your harvested rainwater or just
Great,
empty
thank you.
it after that storm event into vegetated areas.
Gotcha. And then Josh also asked, of all the recommendations you've shared, what would you say is the most impactful for renters without yards to implement to be more watershed friendly?
I'll probably say volunteering with the community. Um, and and that includes talking to your neighbors about stuff they can do, getting your friends to volunteer with you. Um, because the more people we can get involved, the more impact we can make.
Awesome. Thank you. And then I see Becca is referring to our other question in the chat, which is just asking if the presentation is going to be available after this. And I believe the answer is yes.
Yeah, I believe that. Yes, I think that's the answer too. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay. All right. And that looks like all of our questions, no hands raised. So thank you again, Megan, for your detailed presentation today, and to all who've watched and participated in today's session. Following the close of the session, you will be asked to provide your feedback to our speakers in a brief Zoom survey. We appreciate your time in completing this form. It'll help us make improvements for future conferences and sessions. The next session in the fourth annual sustainability conference is titled Southeastern Pennsylvania's Energy Transition, a Regional Perspective, and it will be held at 4 p.m. today, Thursday, June 12th. If you did not sign up already, please visit delco.gov/sustainability/conference to sign up. Finally, we would like to invite you all to attend our closing keynote celebration on Saturday, June 14th at the Lazaretto in Tinicum Township. This event will include a breakfast and a keynote presentation from Glenn Hurricane Schwartz and will be followed by an EV Expo, networking with more than 30 local organizations, including the Conservation District and I believe Penn State Extension, and museum tours in the historic Lazaretto Quarantine Station. Walk-ins are welcome on Saturday. So thank you again for your participation in the fourth annual Delaware County